All right. I think we are live now. Here's hoping.
All right. Well, welcome
Yep.
everybody. Thanks for joining us again. We've got a world building part 2 going on here for random encounters this time. We went for a little over 2 hours and kind of cut us off a little bit last time because we could have gone for a lot more. Did get a few comments and things people talked about, a few ideas that popped up. So as we were talking about off stream here shortly, the comment said somebody had a plan. Who's got the plan? Somebody did. So I was like, well, I usually roll highest in the initiative apparently and get the ball rolling. So before we jump into that, though, just in case you didn't join us last month and are not sure about who our friends here are, well, Don, say hi.
Yo, what's up?
Don and I are the Damn Good Games duo, and joining us for all of our random encounters so far has been Brian.
Yep.
Hello.
Oh man, I was hoping you were gonna have like the voice thing on again and do the robotic with the wave.
No, I made sure it was off this time.
Voice mod, folks. Voice mod.
And then we also once again have Jack joining us too.
Heck yeah.
Greetings. How are you?
The original voice mod.
Indeed.
Yep.
As what was it you said off stream? The original voice mod destroying your voice box, I think, right?
Yes.
Yep. That's why all the old GMs sound like ancient smokers, because we've just blown out our vocal cords sounding like dragons.
I mean, it also helps that I'm also an ancient smoker. So it makes it easier to sound like a dragon. But luckily, people seem to like the smoky voice. So
It's that dulcet, smoky, sultry sound.
All right, so the first thing is actually, I'm not going to dive into the first thing I got told. I want to dive into the question that came off of Twitter just recently because I thought this was a really good one, and I'm sure we all have multiple answers for this. So the question was, what makes a world evocative? That's a good response, Don. You want to start? Touch on at least one thing, or if you.
Honestly, if you're a DM or GM and you're playing in a world that's not your own and you're not excited about it, you're going to lose that. I'm going to start with that. Being evocative is a direct reflection of how excited your GM is going to be when they're displaying the information of their world to you. If it's deadpan and monotone, you're going to lose that. That's where I would start.
to play off that pretty directly, some worlds that you didn't make can be highly evocative if you are really enthusiastic for them, if you really love them. If I were to run Tolkien, if I were to run The One Ring, if I were to run anything set in Tolkien's Legendarium, I promise you it would come over evocative because the combination of the depth of material available with the true excitement I have for the work and the setting and the feeling of depth that it has, that will come across. So you're looking at, I'd say, 3 factors. The first and likely the most important is the one he mentioned. How excited are you about the material?
Yep.
How much do you love it? Second, how deep is the material? How much is there of it? It's hard to get super excited about something that's just broad strokes unless you're the one designing it.
Yeah, true.
As you're going, okay? And that can be very difficult for your players to get super excited about because they don't know what they're getting involved in. Don't get me wrong. If you're creating as a group and that's what everyone decided to do, then you're looking at an entirely different arrangement.
Yeah.
But when it comes to presenting a world that's already made, whether it's yours or someone else's, if it's not deep enough to feel real, it won't evoke real feeling.
Yeah, you're going to lose that immersion right off, especially if it's just broad strokes.
And the third thing to match the depth is shallowness. So you've got to have the surface details in that first place you are.
Yep.
That make a world look real so that they care enough to dig deeper and find the hidden depths.
Yep. Make it dirty.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that shallowness can be sometimes the hardest because I know, at least in my my experience, I paint in very broad, very pronounced strokes when I do a lot of my creating, and I have trouble with doing a finer touch on things. So as I've kind of improved in my DMing, that's something that I've worked on is focusing on the small details, the light details, like you said, the little elements that make the world feel real and make your players kind of get pulled in. And to me, that's like you said, that shallowness, that's the part right there that pulls them in.
Yeah, the analogy is basically, how are you going to get somebody to swim if you can't get them to wade?
Yep.
If you
Yeah.
don't interest them into moving deeper into the water. And to, just throw out another axiom or saying, the devil is in the details.
Mm-hmm. Well, I
It's
mean,
the little things about a scene, setting that first scene, the first scene you ever run in the world, setting that first scene, if you're not engaging all of the senses, not just the eyes, not just the ears, all the senses. Engage engage the sense of touch through the warmth on their skin or how the wind feels. Engage the sense of smell. It's the most closely tied to memory. It's going to be literally the most evocative for them.
Yes, absolutely.
Science. Apply science to your art.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, especially if you're doing something like a dockside, immediately start explaining how it smells. You are going to drag people into that scene who aren't even paying attention. They're immediately going to start paying attention because it's going to trigger memory.
You've got to talk about the sharp, rough feeling of salt air on the skin and in the lungs, combined with the smell of both fresh and rotting fish, and the smells of and you have to get particular about that because you don't just say the smell of rotting fish. Have they smelled rotting fish?
Yeah.
Maybe they haven't. You have to get into the minutia of what that comes across as. You also have to deal with the smell of seaweed that's been up out of the water and drying.
Yep.
Or not drying, depending on the environment.
Yeah, those deep, pungent smells and the flies. I mean, it's an entire ecosystem that you can just start explaining away before you even have details of what the town looks like, because they're already going to be walking on that boardwalk in their head before you even start explaining it.
Imagine it's a hot day.
Yeah.
And this dock is on the coast. You've got a desert town. They're going to smell the creosote and the pitch bubbling up from the dock from where it was waterproofed.
Yep.
So,
and if it wasn't waterproof, then they have an entirely different smell and another set of problems.
Yep. The dry rot.
So what I'm hearing is one of the biggest parts of making a world that you're playing in, whether you built it or not, evocative for most of you here, doesn't really have a whole lot to do with, I mean, it does when you get into it, but the initial, like, getting into it, the wading part, the putting your, feet in the water, has more to deal with setting the scene and playing off of making it seem like, I think Jack said it the best way, making it seem like it's real.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that kind of description can only really be achieved if you know all the details about the setting you're portraying. And if you know that town is there, how long it's been there, whether or not they waterproof their docks or simply replace them, et cetera, because those change all the details.
Yeah.
Now, you can totally make this up as you go along, like I just did.
Yep. Same.
But then you have to remember it.
Yeah. Notes.
The worst thing is when you say something different the next time and your players go, that's not here.
And those folks that are in the actual play, if you don't take notes, be prepared to watch 3.5 hours of yourself because you're going to forget.
Yeah, that's why I record all my sessions, because I like improving. I like when they throw something at me, just reacting to it. But the downside of that is if I don't have a notebook nearby or I'm furiously typing, that
You're
might
screwed.
get lost forever.
Yep.
And they're like, so what was that NPC's name like 3 weeks ago? And I'm like, well, why don't you tell me?
Yeah, no, I absolutely make my players
where's the
write it
date?
down for me.
Yeah.
I'm working too hard already.
Hot GM tip for anybody listening. let your players help you remember things.
Yep.
Like, we're laughing, but that's because it's true.
Also, don't correct them if they get information wrong, because that could just be their character misremembering things.
Unless it was 2 days ago for their character and it's been a month for the player.
Yeah, that's true.
Or it was
Yeah.
an oops on your end. I've had a couple times where like I've given them information and they've taken it a completely different way, and they're sitting there really like going down the wrong path because they misunderstood what I said, and I'm like, I'm just gonna pause you right there. This is what the NPC might have said, but this is what the NPC meant because I'm running the NPC.
Yeah.
Point of order, you're
sometimes-
going completely off base and I need to redirect you. But sometimes if they're just a little off base or just have pieces missing, but they're still like in the same general direction, let it ride.
Then you can let them go and discover what the discrepancies are en route, but never let them flounder because
No.
they misunderstood what you said.
Yeah.
Their characters are in the world. They're
Mhm.
looking at it, especially if you're trying to get them to remember something you told them rather than something an NPC told them.
Yeah, true.
You should remind them.
Yes.
If it's something an NPC told them, they're more on their own, and they have to deal with the fact that the NPC is, by their nature, an unreliable narrator.
Yep.
And if they don't get that, I feel bad for them.
Yep. They'll learn the hard way. The other part that I would advocate for, that's the second half of that, as far as bringing people in and making it an evocative setting, is as a DM/GM, no matter what system it is, you have to really enjoy and be excited about that setting yourself. If you're not, it's probably not the setting for you. Don't try to force it. No matter what the players want to do, you're just going to bring the game down if it's not a setting you're interested in.
And it's not even just the setting, it's the system, it's all of it.
Yeah.
Every one of the aspects, you're there to have fun too. And if you're not having fun, they're not going to have fun.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So don't push it.
Yeah.
I totally
Yeah,
agree.
just
when we
just about oh, go ahead.
All right, back to you after this, Brian. When we say, be excited about it, be interested, that doesn't mean you have to be super animated or, like bouncy and talking really fast and really, really animated with it. When you like something and you're describing it, it comes across.
Yep.
This is like, if you're describing to someone what your favorite meal is compared to your least favorite meal, if you don't tell them this is my favorite, this is my least favorite, they will be able to pick it out just by you describing it.
Yep, the human bullshit detector is real.
As an example, I run an actual play in a world I myself created. When I'm describing that, I may not sound animated or excited at all because whatever scene I'm describing may not be animated or excited.
Tone.
Right. As you delve deeper into the crypt, you can just smell the faintest hint of dust on the air. The air in the tomb is still, but there's a whisper of sound from somewhere deeper within. There's nothing excited or animated about how I'm handing you the information, but you can still tell I care about the information.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you had something there, Brian?
Yeah, I was going back to like really being in general excited about a setting is something that I know is a good indicating factor for me is when I get excited about a setting, I kind of tunnel vision on that, and that becomes like it'll always be in the background of my mind. It's like I'll be doing something else. I'll be, at work, and it's just great examples when I finally got to run Eberron, when they started putting the 5e material out for Eberron. I went on a deep dive. I grabbed all the 3rd edition books. I just started all out, and it's just I lived and breathed Eberron for the duration of that campaign, and it's still one of my favorites. But it was just it's wonderful. It's great.
It is a deep and fantastic setting.
Mm-hmm.
Rich did a really, really good job with that. I only hate him for it a lot because he beat me out. I did turn in an entry for that setting search way back when, but his was way better, so it's okay.
No.
So
It's funny though, because I'm still using the setting that I turned in, which was based on the Keep on the Borderlands, just expanded to where chaos is actually not just a wilderness, but literal chaos from broken area of the world because of a god's war.
Oh, cool.
So another point now that a pitfall maybe that can be fallen into, being too excited and too animated, but giving too much detail, right?
Ah, yes. The fabled lore dump.
Yeah.
Not just that, but many colored herrings.
Yeah.
Because they decide that you gave all this detail, therefore every detail you mentioned must be plot critical.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
So you've got two problems going there. Like you mentioned, the lore dump, which means you've turned off half the player's brains.
Yep.
Because you're giving them too much at once.
Yeah.
And the other half is if they're paying attention to every bit of it, it's because they think it's on the test.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't show up to listen to a half hour of exposition, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah, you have to get your exposition in where they look for it, which is why you have to give them the little details on the top. You have to give them the little sprinkles on the cake so they want to cut into it.
Yeah, I really like the methodology and the way, like, for instance, From Software is a brilliant storyteller in the sense that the way they give you lore is little snippets and details that are attached to the items you pick up in their games.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you actually have to piece it together. They don't spoon feed you anything. So those that seek the lore can find it. Those who don't care can just keep playing.
Bungie actually is a lot like that as well with Destiny and Halo before it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Halo, before it got taken away from them, Halo had some amazingly deep lore with potential links all the way back to their first stuff, Marathon.
Yeah. Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
So, Brian.
I was a Destiny player.
Go for it. No, go for it. You're a Destiny player. I want to hear this.
I was going to say, yeah, I was a Destiny player. I was a Destiny player for a while.
Same.
I started with the alpha and the beta, played all through it. I got Destiny 2 the night it came out.
Same.
Even before I think it came out for the PS4, and I didn't have a PS4 at that point. I had that was my PS3 that was not overheating, and I did not have to take it apart. This is taking me back. But yeah, it's just the world that they built, and I think that was, like, the mechanics are smooth. Bungie does really good mechanics for these style games, but what kept me was that world that they built and the lore that they would just, like you said, they would just drip to you. It would be in weapons, it would be in just walking around, it would be in like random bits of dialogue, and you would just put it together. And just one had a great amount of that, and two just exploded with that and made this amazing world.
I miss my Warlock.
I only stopped playing. I went back to playing D1 to try to get my Warlock all the way up, but I only really stopped playing D2 after they took all of the old content off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was already mad that I had joined D2 so late that I missed the Red War and couldn't get into it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a dumb choice.
And then they took out all of Forsaken and all this other stuff. I'm like, it just made me really mad. It backed me off of it. But I love Destiny, the setting, so much that I actually have to decide what system to do it in. It may end up being PF2. It was originally going to be PF1. I have a setting called Bastion, set in the far future of one of my fantasy worlds, inspired by Destiny, where half the world's been taken over by the Abyss and half the world's been taken over by Hell, and they're fighting the blood war on that planet. And all that's left is one little valley kept alive through druidic magic and clerical encampments with one god left, and that's it.
Oh, that's amazing.
Your team has an angel, i.e. a little celestial crystal creature that acts as the ghost for the whole team.
That's awesome.
Oh, little light.
Yeah.
Okay, now that I've let us get derailed, but it's okay. I enjoyed it. I had to. I put a lot of time.
It's definitely world building
this isn't
related.
world building, because I do have one more piece, and it's kind of interesting. world building wise, I had some questions as to how to make it feel more like Destiny while still running a tabletop, right?
Mhm.
So when you kill monsters from another plane, since all the bad guys are from other planes, they leave behind vortices of dimensional energy that you pick up, and your angel then transfers into energy or uses that energy to craft ammunition, etc. So you get ammo and loot drops in the lore of the game.
Well, and I mean, Glimmer is programmable matter, right? So,
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Exactly.
but yeah.
All right. So there was a comment which you just kind of did it on your own anyway, Jack. But somebody's like telling you to say bad things about Destiny before they reinstall it, and then they thanked you for it because you did tell them some bad things with the stuff they took out. So.
Right, because otherwise
otherwise
we'd all go back to it and stay there because it's a fantastic fun game.
Mm-hmm. Then this will turn into a completely different stream.
Yeah, we'd come back streaming next week. We'd be streaming Destiny next week instead.
To be fair, I need help from 3 or 4 people so I can finish the raids in Destiny 1.
Same.
I did all the story 4 times. I just haven't done the raids.
Oh man, that's tempting. I haven't done them in a while, but I know I still got it.
All right.
Oh my
Okay.
Titan.
I'm bad.
So, Brian, I was gonna ask you as a thing. Do you have how do you prevent yourself from the lore dump or being too detailed in some of these descriptions to set the world or set the scene?
So one of the things that, because I know that I'm a chronic oversharer, because I get really excited and then it's a waterfall. That's, if you know me, you know, like if I get really excited about things, 2 things happen. I start to talk a lot and I lose volume control. It's great. It's great on calls. So what I try to do is I try to adopt the less is more mentality when I'm sharing, which is, you know, don't give them too much. You can always give them more later on.
But you
So
can't give them less.
try
than you already
not
did.
to monologue, and it's a lot of it's a lot of just kind of talking and feeling it out, and like, does this feel right to me? And I do good most of the time. There are times where like somebody will ask me some benign question about the world, and next thing you know, that bartender has just given them a monologue of, you know, the last season and how the crops went and why the crops were that good. And I'm like, I probably should have stopped about 5 minutes ago. The other thing that I do is I try to find other people that are not in my game that are also GMs to talk about my world with, to kind of scratch that sharing itch.
Oh no, I get that.
And that's the real way to go, is you just find people online that are not connected to your game at all, and you just say, I know you want to talk about your world. I want to talk about my world. Let's just throw our information back and forth of one another and be really excited about it.
Yeah.
It's
Especially when you have twists.
It's not just the excitement there, of course, because the more we share with one another, the more both sets of games improve.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Because a singular mind, no matter how brilliant, is not able to see things from as many perspectives. So the more you're throwing this information back and forth with sounding boards, the better your final product is going to be.
Yeah.
It as you say, it does also scratch that itch, but it lets you go, if they go, wait, what is this? And why would you do that? It's not necessarily a criticism, but now you have to come up with the answer, and you know that it's an important question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
When it comes to deciding exactly how much to share, the thing to remember to do is throw out the hooks.
Yeah.
Throw out the things that answer their surface questions in ways that show them there are more questions to ask and intrigue them enough that they want to. Because if they drag it out of you, then it's not an info dump.
You're not wrong.
I think that's a great way to do it. And it's one of those things that when you do that, you also have to remember, if they don't bite the hook, that's fine.
Just move on.
You cast it again later at a different spot. I like the fishing analogy.
Yep. It works really well.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
perfect.
if you try to yank it and sink that hook in when they haven't really taken the bait, then you're just going to lose the bait and maybe even the hook.
I do the exact same thing
Yeah.
there, George. He said I also love writing short stories in my world that I built. But I usually do that with set pieces, things that I want to happen in games but aren't directly connected to a location.
That's interesting. I've actually only done super short vignettes for some of the worlds I've built, just as illustrations of feel. I
Yeah.
don't think I've actually even gone so far as to write short stories. I've never thought of myself as an author. I think of myself as an artist. I think of myself as a storyteller.
Yeah.
I'm a world builder. But if my art was writing stories or writing books, that's what I do. I'd be more likely to make good money at it than what I am doing.
You're not wrong. I feel that too.
Any other tips for helping prevent the overshare?
Yes. Think of it in your own head.
Yeah.
Like a mystery. Think of it as, this isn't just stuff I want them to know. This is stuff their characters need to discover. The process of discovery is also part of the game.
Yep.
If you are looking at it that way, then you'll be less likely to dump and overshare, because the parceling out of information helps you control the flow and the pacing of the game itself.
Yeah.
And when it's tied together like that, you're much less likely to give them information that could accidentally speed up the plot or whatever.
True.
That's true. You give them the right or wrong, however you want to phrase it, piece of information too early, and all of a sudden you're trying to figure out how to take your level 5 party against something they weren't supposed to face until they were, double-digit levels.
Yeah. When they go, oh, that's the final big bad, and go, let's go get him now. You're like,
yeah. So
not a good idea. Not a good idea.
The only other
keep throwing the hooks.
No, go. Yeah.
I was gonna say, you keep throwing the hooks down. You're like, they pass some NPCs on the street, and they're like, "Oh, where are you going?" "Oh, we're going to the swamps to deal with the witch mother that lives there." "Oh, that sounds really dangerous. You got to be ready for that. Are you ready for that?" Yeah, we're fine. We're fine. Do you know the way to get there? No. Nobody goes there. Okay, we'll find it ourselves. That's my due diligence.
Yep.
That's a paraphrased real story.
I had a feeling.
Yep. I feel that deep in my soul. I was going to say the only other thing that I would probably point out as advice to stop from lore dumping is, when we're GMing and DMing, especially worlds we've created our own, oftentimes the worlds we created are stories that we're wanting to show the players and things. As far as these are the narratives that are going on in the world that we've developed because we found them interesting as GMs and DMs. What we need to make sure we do is keep those narratives in the background and make sure that the players either decide to dive into them or not. Because really, when it comes to playing as a DM, your concept of the narrative is the world you're building.
I can't agree with that in any more strongly a way than I already do. I would go so far as to say, let go of the idea that you have a narrative.
Yes.
Don't let go of the idea of story. Don't let go of the idea that you're creating a great story at the table together. What you provide is the stage, the world, the background, the situations that are the impetus for action. The story is about the player characters and how they interact with the world you have given them.
Exactly.
If your story isn't about your player characters, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. You're also writing a book.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
But don't inflict that on your players.
Exactly.
Even some of the pre-written ones out there, you can very easily, they become about the players. I know that I'm running Curse of Strahd, and I know going into it, some of the players were like, "Oh, like this is going to be all about Strahd," and I was like, "No, no, it's going to be about what you do in the world and how the world reacts."
The choices you make given the world that is presented to you.
Yep.
I've never run Curse of Strahd in 5e. I've
Mhm.
I've run every version of Ravenloft before that. Most
Uh-huh.
recently, I ran a version that I cobbled together using material from every edition of Ravenloft before 5e. And I ran it in Pathfinder. My version of Strahd for
Oh,
both Pathfinder and 5e is on my website still. I haven't gotten rid of that yet. My version of Strahd has 6 levels of Paladin, by the way. He was the
that
warrior,
makes
good and
sense.
just.
Yeah, that
What
makes
point did
sense.
they just wipe that off his record? I'm like, come on. Anyway, so yeah. But the thing is, sure, I presented the situations, and everybody's like, "Oh, it's very railroady. You end up here, and you're gonna." They managed to get to call Strahd out and get him to come after them while they were hanging out at the church, and they blew the heck out of him because he was off his home ground. They managed to bamboozle him and catch him off guard. Now, of course, when they actually had to finish fighting him later in his own home, it was much, much worse because
Yeah.
now he knew what to do. But the first time, they rode roughshod over him, and they were like, "Oh, no one expected that to happen. Me, them, nobody." But I was like, that's what happens when your players have true agency. You let them do things, and when they come up with the idea of being a smartass to somebody as arrogant as Strahd and saying you can't hurt us, come get us, basically, that's likely to have an effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because while he is a supreme planner and a genius, he is also an arrogant son of a bitch.
Oh yeah, he's
Oh, yes.
classic narcissist.
Yeah. I read Strahd the summer before I was going to be running Curse of Strahd. And
Nice.
I actually have it on audiobook, and I was listening to it, and that was the point where I was back in my office, but nobody else was. So most of the lights were off. I was the only person entirely, and I'm just sitting there listening to Strahd talk about like how he became Strahd, and it's just you hit the nail on the head. He is arrogant. That is
Yeah.
him right there. He is arrogant, and he's just it's his downfall.
In my version of Ravenloft, he was not the first Dark Lord. He was kind of trapped into the
Ooh.
situation intentionally by Aslan.
Like that.
Kind of like Davy Jones
Yes.
style.
Well, look at it this way. In the story we know, Strahd has killed his brother. This is known. He is approaching Tatiana. She rebukes him, and then his guards shoot him. Why? Why did all of the guards of his castle suddenly shoot him?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
It does
if
it was entirely a plot by an external power. That
Oh
the
yeah.
dark powers he was talking to weren't the dark powers. It was somebody who's trying to get him to come in so they could go out.
So
I like that you picked Aslan. That makks sense.
Aslan always struck me as a more likely first Dark Lord than Strahd. Strahd doesn't even feel like a very old vampire.
No. No, he's still very young as far as the way he behaves. He's
sure,
not
500, 700, that's young for a vampire.
Yeah, like you don't feel the ages of wisdom that it would have stamped down as arrogance like a lich would.
Right. And the other thing is, of course, because of his obsession, he is kind of insulated from the things that would teach him wisdom.
Exactly. He's kind of stuck in a logic trap in a way.
And that's very specifically set up. Barovia is set up to do that to him, just as all the players.
I love Ravenloft.
If you don't play the Dark Lord's weaknesses, you're ignoring the fact that Ravenloft, the world building section here, Ravenloft is designed as a punishment and a prison for them.
Yep.
They're not going to operate perfectly properly. If they did, they could get out.
Yep.
Yeah.
So to also kind of help tie this in too, world building doesn't stop.
Nope.
No matter when you've created everything you need for it, everything to go, it doesn't stop. Because for your world to be a living, breathing, for it to be evocative, the world has to respond or react to what the players do.
Yep.
So the players, as Jack said, calling out Strahd, playing to his arrogance, and Strahd's like, well, I'm going to show you, so that, he comes down and confronts them and something happens.
Mm-hmm.
The players decide to, I'm giving some pretty simple examples coming up here, but if anybody's got any other ones, feel free. But, the players, decide to rob a shopkeeper, and then the world reacts by them getting arrested. Or, the shopkeeper fights back, and then it goes from burglary to murder. Or something along those. Don't just let the players have free reign to do stuff and have nothing happen for it, good or bad.
Mm-hmm. No. I would also say that this is the fact that your world is constantly living and growing also removes the excuse that you have to have it finished when you start.
You're never going to be finished, so don't let that stop you.
Exactly.
I'm always talking about world building. Everywhere people see me, I'm always talking about world building. World build, world build, world build. Don't prep, world build instead. Keep building your world. We'll build this. But my third installment of Game Master Tips says, here's what you need for your first game. You need a town with a tavern and a nearby problem. Why do you need a tavern?
Nothing more than that.
Because every town of any size, any town that has more than 10 people in it, has a place where they all get together. And until they're big enough to have a town hall, that's the tavern. That's the inn. That's legitimately the center of any community. You should not forget that. You shouldn't think, oh, that's just a trope, I should ignore it. No, that's the center of the community. That's where people are going to go if they have a problem.
Yep.
So that's where the adventurer should be hanging out.
And if for some reason you don't like a tavern or you don't like that trope, you still need to have some place where townspeople are going to gather and socialize.
You have to have that social hub, as they call it in MMOs.
Yep. Make it a market square, a church. It doesn't matter. It's a hub.
The church can be a really good one, especially for a group that's focused around a single religion, which can be a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had one group of 5e pre-generated characters that were all worshippers of Lathander. Warlock, Celestial, Celestial Pact Warlock, Celestial Blooded Sorcerer, Paladin, Cleric, you name it. There was one of those. Oh, there was a Barbarian Zealot of Lathander as well. So
nice.
They were called the Hand of Lathander because they all worshiped the same god and they had a single goal. Yeah.
We still haven't done all clerics.
Or the all warlocks. I really wanted to try and play that character.
Yeah, we were thinking about doing an all clerics where it's just all clerics from different religions that showed up at this big religious conference and everything goes sideways.
Yeah,
I remember talking about that.
You're all working together maybe to figure out who killed the speaker of the religions that you had gotten together and elected.
Yep.
And everybody's blaming each other's religion for it. And no, that actually sounds like a lot of fun.
I was thinking of making it
definitely not a dungeon crawl though.
No, it would be a lot of social, political intrigue. Plus, I was going to throw in some eldritch horror in there and make it real fun.
Of course you do.
Yeah.
If it's deeply involving religion and it doesn't have, and it only has politics and intrigue, and you're leaving out the eldritch horror, you're missing the point of religion.
Right.
Religion is how we make ourselves feel better about the eldritch horror we live in, isn't it?
That's what I thought.
Don and I were going to be part of a all warlocks game, and so I used the marionette that Don created, and I did a celestial warlock that was imbued with the power of this divine being because the divine being didn't trust a human or a mortal to get the job done. So they found this doll that they had put their energy and essence into to create a being to go fight for them and do their bidding.
Did you use the Reborn from the Ravenloft book?
I might have. I actually can't remember.
Yeah, because I know that they do specify that Reborn can be in artificial bodies as well. And fundamentally, the mechanics aren't that different from Warforged for 5e.
Yeah. Reborn is a good lineage. I have a player that's a Reborn right now. And it's really fun to do the roll for memories. Where it's because instead of sleeping, you just kind of fall into memories. So it's always fun to have the player just roll. And I'm like, okay, like you can either give this to me now or you can give it to me between now and next session. Just give me a memory of your character. Because this is also the player that was like, this is what my character thinks their backstory is.
Yep.
Ooh.
I had a similar thing going on with my Reborn Vengeance Paladin, who looked like I don't know if you've seen all the art online. At one point, they were going to get Jason Momoa to play the Crow. My Vengeance Paladin looked like Jason Momoa as the Crow.
That's great.
And he had, in fact, come back from the dead in order to avenge his own death.
That's awesome.
Unfortunately, he didn't know who did it, so
I'm like terrified of anyone wanting to be like if they ever do a remake of the Crow.
They
or
are.
anything.
They're doing it. Bill Skarsgård is going to be the new Crow.
So he's
is that who it is?
Yep.
Hasn't everybody who's played the Crow died?
No.
No? Okay, is that just the first one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there haven't been any other
incidents
movies. The other person who played him was most recently in the one person who played him the longest, actually, in the TV show Crow's Stairway to Heaven was Mark Dacascos, who was recently in John Wick 3.
Yep. He was also the director in Iron Chef. Or the chairman, I mean.
Chairman, yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Well, now that I've derailed us, I'll bring us back. One of the other points.
What's funny about that is I think that his first big movie was Only the Strong, and he's playing a army vet who learned capoeira in South America and brings it to a Miami.
I think you're right.
Town. I just rewatched that like a month ago.
So one of the person that they watched the whole thing and they talked to me and chatted with me about it. It's actually someone that's played in the both Marches campaigns that Don and I have run. So yeah, Drew, you're eventually probably going to watch this, so here you go. This one's for you. Talked about how he reviewed it, considered all being said, and one of the things that he didn't really touch upon was us talking about, the paraphrase here. We talked about having like a government or a governing body of some sort, but also other factions within the world. A dark faction doing things, a thieves guild, or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure we would have gotten to that if I had let us continue where we were going. So we're going to dive into that now because there's easy options here for a thieves guild, an adventurers guild, stuff like that. But we're not going to take the easy route to start with here. What do you think? Factions, other things.
First of all, in the real world, at least, it's never so neat and simple as a thieves guild.
Nope.
Instead, you have 5, even in a relatively prosperous city, not even a huge metropolis. You've got 5 or 6 major organizations, sometimes cooperating, sometimes competing, and tons of street-level gangs that aren't officially tied to the major organizations. And that's just crime. Then we talk about the law enforcement groups, which have guilds. They're called unions in modern day, but they're still a guild. You look at the firemen's organizations. You look at any group that has a major presence outside of its work and is directly involved in political lobbying and charity work, which is another way of exerting soft power.
Mm-hmm.
Because the more charity work you do, the more attention people pay to your social and political perspectives. Because obviously you care, otherwise you wouldn't be doing that work. Organizations that are involved in such things. Now, don't misunderstand me. I am not saying they are doing so for nefarious purposes. I am merely saying that once you begin doing so, you have a certain amount of power that you thus then must use responsibly, and a faction forms around you.
Yep.
So in your average fair-sized fantasy city, you're going to have, say, just to be simple, 5 different crime groups, 3 major churches if they are not a single pantheon.
Yep.
If the local religion is of a single pantheon, then you'll still have 2 major churches, and they'll still be rivals somehow.
Yep.
Because people.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll have the organizations that are supporting different parts of the government and the way they interact, because what they want and believe people need is different. So you'll have the Law Enforcement's Guild, sometimes going toe-to-toe with the Firemen's Guild, sometimes going toe-to-toe with the Mages Guild. Oh, definitely the Mages Guild.
Yeah.
But the Law Enforcement Guild has to have the Mages Guild help anytime there's a magic-related crime.
Yep. Yeah, that's,
so you've got
that's
a complicated
big one. Because if you're
I
going
would
to have...
recommend looking in some of the old White Wolf documents, in some of the old White Wolf books for their settings, you will see relationship webs.
Yeah.
And you'll have the arrows going both ways. This arrow this way says, I feel this way about this being or faction. And the arrow pointed the other way says they feel this way about the other person or faction, and how they're tied together. These can be very useful sort of amorphous organization charts to help you visualize what's happening in your town. And if you've got super fancy computer programming, you can actually sort of nest them or make them 3-dimensional, so that you have your underworld rotating on the bottom, and then the open powers rotating in the middle, and then the noble houses and merchant houses that are paying and pulling the strings from the other side up here. And then you've got that web going both vertically and horizontally.
Oh, yeah. Another thing that you can look at is the way Shadowrun handles it, because it's a good map on how political forces will manipulate third-party factions in order to vie for power between the two. And that's a really good way, that's a good analog to put in larger cities, where you're going to have thieves guilds and such that are being employed by governments or by local merchants guilds to sabotage each other, and the players can end up in the middle of that very quickly.
Oh, absolutely. Especially in extraordinarily lawful societies.
Yep.
Because you can't get what you need done inside the system. So you have to have deniable assets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those things still need to get done, regardless of what the law says.
Yep. And those might just be the players, wittingly or unwittingly.
Well, if you're playing Shadowrun, then they are.
Yeah.
They just are.
Yeah. But I meant in fantasy as well.
Absolutely. The Shadowrun mission approach can work very well in a fantasy setting. Especially when you're looking at a high magic fantasy setting like, I don't know, Eberron.
Yep.
You could run Shadowrun in Sharn and substitute every single piece of cyberware as magic and move on without changing anything else.
Yep.
Oh yeah, totally. I'm doing the calculations in my head right now.
Doing that.
It's perfect. Yeah.
And you can set up like an entire segment of one of the guilds building basically completely devoid of sentience warforged and having cyber zombies, and you could do all sorts of fun stuff.
So I'm going to
And there's
state
a whole
Don.
lot more room for prosthesis and the rest of that.
Yep.
Honestly, Eberron is a really good example of the faction design
Yeah.
to begin with, because not only do you have your very above board here are the powers that be of the nations, you then have the dragon marked houses, which are a separate layer of power that is still legitimate. And then you have various cults, religions that can all claim to be good because alignment and power have nothing to do with one another in Eberron. Because you can be a chaotic evil cleric of the lawful good god and still get your power.
Yep.
You can be a chaotic evil gold dragon or a lawful good red dragon. The world is what the world is, not what people think it is. And then, so you've got those layers. You've got, the churches, separate layer from the 5 houses, separate layer from the nations of Galifar, separate layer, again, from the criminal organizations, the quote-unquote thieves guild, the specific guild of Sharn, the sub-guilds of Sharn. The people who are trying to figure out a way to compete with the dragon-marked houses, despite the huge advantages that the dragon-marked houses have.
Yep.
It's such a diverse setting. And that's one of the reasons I like so much about it, because like you can look at any particular place in Eberron and it's got a lot of information, but at the same point it has space for a player to jump in. So like you look at anywhere in Eberron and you get more than just a single coastline, not to call anyone out.
Now, I have to interject here.
Would that
That's
coast
all,
be full of swords, perhaps?
That would all be the modern coastal warlocks problem. Because when I first encountered the Forgotten Realms as Ed Greenwood envisioned it,
Yep.
It was a lot bigger.
Yep.
I never played on the Sword Coast. We were in Waterdeep a couple of times, but we mostly played in the Dale Lands, which is actually where Ed prefers.
Do you remember the Dragon Magazine map?
Yep.
That was piece by piece?
Yep.
I used to have all of those.
And that first gray box for the Forgotten Realms that came out was brilliant. I still talk to Ed pretty often. Not pretty. I talk to Ed every now and then on Twitter, but he's very cool. And I'm very sad because I had adventures that I was building for the Dale Lands, and now I'm not going to.
Yep.
For reason.
Yeah.
Yep. Same. For lots of reasons.
Yeah. There's plenty of those. We're going to avoid stating them directly and getting onto that because that could be a whole another tangent to what's going to go on there.
Correct. If we go there, that's what we'll be doing.
Yeah, exactly. So, Don, first I'm going to state before we move on, this conversation has not influenced some of my original thoughts and ideas for the next campaign we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to align. It's going to seem like it did. I'm telling you it didn't, but there will be some influence later on. But the initial parts just...
Yeah, I got you.
It's reinforcing.
I got you.
I'm going to toss this one to you first, Brian. How important do you think it is to have a balance between these factions? Do they need to be balanced equally? Should there be a clear power structure? Does that matter?
I would say it depends, because I feel like you can do it balanced and have everything kind of running more or less in the background, kind of coexisting, and have it more of a set piece if you don't have players that want to get into it. But if you have players that want to poke and prod, or players that are like, I want to be involved in this crime faction, then at that point I really like to tweak things and have things out of balance, so the scale's already slightly tipped as the players come in and start messing with things, things will become unbalanced even more. They'll start going back and forth, and I feel like that feels a little bit more realistic. That it's never going to be 100% balanced. There's always going to be a little bit off, and it's always going to be kind of moving and existing and shifting depending on the things that are going on in your world. So I guess the short answer is both. I picked both.
You got more to add, Don?
Oh no, keep going, Brian. I was listening.
I was gonna say, so like one of the things I really liked doing, and I actually, the first Forgotten Realms game I ran when I just took a deep dive into the cults, is I made a whole bunch of demonic cults, and I had all these demonic cults all working in the background, all doing all of this stuff. And were my players really interested in that? No. They interacted with the cult once, and they were like, that's cool, that's great, let's go onwards and deal with this forest problem. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to have them play out in the background. And it was one of those things where it's like, well, you walked into this cult's facility and you cleaned their clock. You took out 90% of them. So that's going to create a power vacuum. So this is going to play out in the background while things are going on. And sadly, that campaign kind of ended before they could see the fruits of their labors, and some of the other cults could start to vie for control and start to cause serious shenanigans. But yeah, that they ended up being a little bit of a set piece in the background where they weren't doing as much because the players weren't really engaging with it as much. I mean, they were doing things in the background, sure. And when I got really bored, I would just sit there and furiously write down what they were doing and write out all of the cursed items that they got from their respective demons of choice, which I have buried somewhere. But they for the most part, after the vacuum, they kind of balanced themselves out once again, unless some outside force came in and shook everything up again.
So Matt Colville points out that in the world, if you aren't at war,
Yep.
why not?
Yep.
Because the human state of existence is war, not the opposite.
Yep. Peace is rare.
Peace is carefully preserved. War happens. This is the same thing when you're dealing with humanity on every scale. So if you have a situation where there is equilibrium between a number of different forces and it's stable and it's balanced, it's because there's several people very carefully making sure it is.
Yep. Yeah.
Now, interestingly enough, Greyhawk, of all places, nods to this.
Mm-hmm.
Because the circle of 8 exists to keep the balance, not to be good, not to be evil, but to maintain the balance. Mordenkainen keeps his fingers on the scales.
Yep, he does.
So they explicitly tell you, if things are balanced in Greyhawk, why they are.
Yeah.
Mordenkainen's thumb is on the scale. That's why.
Yeah.
Whereas in the Forgotten Realms, things are not balanced. They are constantly flipping back and forth for a very similar reason. Because Elminster's putting his fingers on the scales and they're already unbalanced.
Yep. No.
And I think
go ahead.
The other thing about that is, though, if you're dealing with a long-lived group of people who are inherently less fractious than humans, say, a very serene group of elves, then their factions may have reached a comfortable equilibrium.
Yeah, almost a
More of a
homeostasis.
stasis,
Yeah.
right? However, that will be stagnant and it will be unable to respond to external threats.
Yep, it'll be inflexible too.
Correct.
In decision making. One thing that I was going to add is there's pseudo balance in the world I created, Prisma, because there's these 3 organizations that are holdovers from the ancient Imperium. the book that kind of manages arcane affairs, but the Hand, which inadvertently ended up being something else. But they are almost like diplomatically immune, this massive, almost monolithic thieves guild. But they don't have a leash on all the other thieves guilds that are under them. They're almost like franchises on themselves. So they just kind of let them do whatever they want to do as long as they don't step too far out of line. So it's kind of like this loose stability. And there's quite a few high-powered people that are manipulating things here and there between the three major organizations.
That sounds like Vetinari's approach from Ankh-Morpork in Discworld. If there must be crime, at least let it be organized crime. Let crime police itself to keep it from causing too much disturbance.
Yeah. And a lot of kingdoms and stuff grant them this sort of diplomatic immunity while they're inside the borders because they hire them to do the work that these kingdoms can't do politically. So they kind of have like this carte blanche as far as how they move and travel through the world, which gives a lot of interesting hooks and intrigue.
What's interesting about that is they could have started either way. Like they start out as a thieves guild and they start doing these things for the other countries, right? And because of that, they gain their diplomatic immunity. Or they could start out with the diplomatic immunity, literally being a cross-country diplomatic corps from the old Imperium, as you mentioned, and develop into a thieves guild because of the natural corruptibility of humankind.
Yeah. And the third one that I don't usually talk about very much because it's more corrupt than the Hand is the Coin, which is a giant financial guild that spans multiple kingdoms that is really in charge.
You know, if your BBEG is capitalism, it may be a little too on the nose.
I mean,
I'm not going to disagree with you, but
power corrupts.
It does, and money is in the world we live in. Money is the ultimate power.
Yep, it's power in liquid form.
Yep.
So part of this too, to kind of go back, tying this all together, starting with Brian actually set me off on this line of thought, talking about the demon cults and how stuff was going on in the background. When you have something that's responding to something your players do, it doesn't have to happen immediately either.
Nope.
It can be a slow play like that. And, you know, the players, a lot of times, and actually probably in every single game at some point, the players are going to create a power vacuum somewhere and leave it behind. Use
On
that.
that same note, you have the laws of unintended consequences.
Yep.
Combined with the fact that the villains are there, if you've already introduced them and you've thrown out the hook, then the villains are still there. They're still planning to do what they were planning to do, whether or not the players engage with your hook. Yep. And if you want to make sure they engage with every hook you throw out from then on, you have the villain's plan go all the way through because they didn't pay it any attention.
Yep, the clock is always ticking.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it benefits to have a lot of the stuff be a bit more subtle and play out in the background because if you do have it front and center almost immediately, what I've found is that your players will immediately feel an obligation to rectify what they did. Yeah, and that can ultimately leave them stuck there. And I think if you have it play out in the background, if you have it play out subtly, you'll get the chance to have something grow and develop and they're doing stuff.
Yep.
And then next thing you know, that's like, oh, you left a power vacuum in this city. And at the same point, you convinced this guard to take over for everybody through deception, making them think that they were the second coming of the Lord of Light. And you just walked away.
I feel like you're calling out Melisandre here.
Or, you know,
I wish I was. Again, true story.
I was waiting for that. I was like, this is how I know a true story from Brian.
Yep. Or, the players do something and they get rid of an evil lord who's oppressing folks, but not a whole lot changes for the peasants except some political leaders shift around here and there. They don't really care who, but later on, this is going to have shockwaves.
Absolutely. And like in the case with the new, prophesied Lord of Light, if they were directly involved in bringing this person to power and then that person becomes the problem, especially if that person becomes the BBEG
Yep.
because of what they did, it can be
fantastic.
Really good. It can be fantastic, but be careful. Make sure they earned it.
Yep.
In other words, make sure they screwed up in the ways that caused that. You didn't just take their good job and twist it.
Yeah.
Or make it look like, oh, these are great things. Make it look like there's no drawbacks and sucker them into making the wrong choice. That's not what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, you don't want to
Law of
subvert your
unintended
players.
consequences is great, but they have to have made unwise decisions. Otherwise, you need to give them the benefit of the doubt because, again, they're not living in that world. They can't see it. They can't read the guy's face. They can't feel the vibes are off.
Yep. And I think probably one of the largest things players are going to see, especially in sittings, is if they affect the influence of a faction, either positively or negatively, that's going to create some interesting turbulence in the political structure of cities. And they're going to see that the next time they visit. And depending on how they affect factions, it may not be a pleasant experience.
Especially if they were in a very tentative equilibrium.
Yeah, exactly.
And the death of one or two people throws it off. Much less, they wiped out an entire watch house. Uh-oh.
And
it was a group of corrupt cops and everything, right? We killed 12 corrupt cops. You still destroyed an entire watch house. Meaning that now there's an entire section of the city with no police oversight.
Yep, and nobody wants it because there's no safety.
Yep.
So I want to revisit something Jack said too, because I think this is really important to remember, and it's kind of world building, also just kind of general GM tip is he mentioned, don't take the thing your players did, and don't take the good thing your players did and make it a bad thing.
No.
Like, I think that happens more often than people realize. Is like somebody's searching for something, and it's like, okay, they did this, and I can twist this and make it something else.
And you can see that. You can see that when new players join your team, and they're like, no, we don't want to affect anything negatively or positively. Like, you'll see players actually shy away from affecting change. And you're like, man, somebody pulled a fast one on these people.
Yeah, that's cheap. That's nasty.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
players will make mistakes. You are allowed to take advantage of those. You are not allowed to invent new ones they didn't make and take advantage of those.
Yeah.
So, kind of like a good example is a simple. Maybe I'm going to simplify it probably a little bit, maybe, but like Brian was saying, like putting this person in power using deception, making them think that they're something they're not.
Yeah, that's pretty obviously on the surface of it. If anyone's actually thinking through it, there's no way that it can end well.
Nope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I would never feel bad in having that end badly.
Yeah,
I would feel bad in letting that end well.
Yeah, that's political hot potato right there.
And the player, 100%, this is the kind of player that, like, he built the character, and he was like, I looked at him when he was like, this is how I'm going to, kind of return peace to this city. And I was like, really? And he was like, yeah, it's what my character would do. And I saw the glint in his eye, and I'm like, roll it. And amazingly high deception score. And I was like, well, this is going to be fun.
I have a hot take, and this is not going to be necessarily super popular, but every adult in the world is an accomplished liar. To some extent or another, we lie to our bosses, to our friends, to ourselves. But there are limits to what deception can accomplish in the long run. It is not that it is not a very effective way of achieving your goals. It very often is.
Mm-hmm.
But once again, with deception especially, the law of unintended consequences rears its head more often.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're making up a new truth. Rather than dealing with what is already there that you can see the effects of, you're making up a new one.
Yep.
And you have to be able to see the possible effects of that as you do it. Really good lying is so much more like improv, so much more like being a game master. Really good lying loses flexibility if it has to consider the consequences. So in a lot of ways, it limits itself in terms of long term. It can work very well in the short term. And keep in mind, when I say short term, I am actually talking about 50 to 100 years. I'm not talking about one person's lifetime.
Yeah.
I have a historical point of view on the world. You can make through your whole life lying to everybody. Not saying you can't. In the long run, it will have super negative effects, and it could even happen much earlier than that.
And, with that, if you take the same scenario and let's say that this person was the second coming of whatever, and then you put them in, there is still potential there to do something that they have to deal with later. But, the players kind of did a good thing there. They should feel good about that, feel that they've succeeded. And if you twist that the wrong way, you wipe all of that out.
Right. If, for instance, you had given the players all of the signs saying that this person legitimately was the second coming of saint-like figure A, and then you twist it around to be a lie, you better have thrown a clue in there somewhere that they just missed. And I mean a couple of big ones.
Yeah.
And in that sort of situation, if that did happen, if your players did miss something, it's okay in that instance and probably almost necessary to, even if it breaks immersion for them instant, to let them know. That way they see the connection and then they can still be in on the story.
It's one of the reasons I remind my players in almost every situation, whether or not there's a character lying, I remind my players to roll insight or sense motive or whatever the appropriate skill is, even when everyone's telling the truth, so that it doesn't give away just because I asked for an insight or a sense motive roll that the guy's lying.
Well, also, if they roll super crappy, they might get misinformed.
They might think the guy's lying when he's telling the truth.
Yep.
Any number of things.
That happens all the time.
When those skills exist in a game, I make sure to prompt my players to use them so that we have a method of getting that information out there, that this guy's not what he seems, that this person is lying, that, that glint of fervor in that person's eye may actually just be a significant mental imbalance, and they don't have duloxetine.
All right, so my last major point for the evening, at least, not saying we're done after this, we'll see where it goes, but I'm going to throw this one to Brian again, too. You have these factions, these organizations doing their thing. There's a big piece that needs to be involved with them as well to make it real, to make it relatable. And to me, I'm pretty sure that is their motivations or goals. So what might be some of those, or how important do you think those are? Like, am I off base? Am I nail on the head? What are you thinking, Brian?
When I build out a faction, I almost like to build them out like I'm building an NPC, where I want to kind of figure out some of those bullet points early on. Like, what is a very distinctive trait of this particular criminal organization? What is very important to them? What will they uphold? And what deep flaw do they have? And now, when the organizations get larger and older, of course, that's going to get diluted as you get different people in with different viewpoints. But I find that like keeping that core can really help. And I know when I was fleshing out the various criminal factions in Sharn, I went ahead and I did that, and it kind of helps you understand like why one is different than the other and how one would operate differently than the other, and like even where they would operate in Sharn specifically, where you have, you know, a group that's going to stick to the lower levels and mostly be enforcers. And on the other hand, you've got a group that they work on buying and selling information primarily, and using blackmail to their advantage. And well, what would happen if they come across each other, if they find a place where they have to fight? What would happen? So yeah, I think you're right on the money. I think coming up with some of those ideas, but you don't want to hold super strong to them, because the leader might be that way, the second in charge might be that way. But as you expand out through that group, you're going to get individuals that have joined it because it's an organization that provides them things that they want.
Yep. I tend to model them after companies, to be honest.
There's an exception to that. And it's a very functional one. When you look at there's two major examples, and they've spread across the world. One started in Sicily, the other in Japan.
Mm.
When you get organizations that come from a very traditional mindset,
that's also
and
true,
initiate their new members in very traditional ways and enforce their behaviors in very specific ways throughout their whole time, then you get a group of people with a unified perspective.
That's true.
Right? Especially when those organizations start not as criminal organizations, but as resistance organizations. Both
Yep.
the Yakuza and the Mafia started as resistance organizations against arrogant nobles who were abusing common folk.
Yep.
When you get organizations that start that way and strongly hold to tradition, to religious values, you very often end up with, at least in the first several generations, if not longer, you end up with people who, while they are doing horribly illegal things, and some of them are bad, you end up with people that may be more moral in some ways, or at least more true to their own code than the officially law-abiding people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any law, anything like that is a social contract. It's a contract between the people in the society and the society itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
If a society is not providing you with what it said it would provide you in the contract, are you beholden to provide it what you said you would provide it?
Yeah.
Gangs, and even more especially truly organized groups like the Yakuza and the Mafia, are also social contracts. And as long as they are providing what they said they would provide to the people who join them, they are valid social contracts.
Mm-hmm.
When you join a gang, you join the Crips, you join the Bloods, you join the Lackawanna 5. Sorry, that's an actual gang in my town. Anyway, if they provide you with the things they said they were going to, which is money, power, the opportunity to get the attention of women, support when you're in trouble, then they're doing better than 5 out of 10 governments on the planet.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is it any surprise then that young people are loyal to them and see them as an opportunity when they can't get real jobs? I realize political rant, but
no, I get what you mean.
Take that back into the world we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have one or two organizations, while most of the organizations are what Brian's talking about. Most of them are, we're just in it for the money and everybody came in for the money. Mm-hmm. You've got one or two that aren't.
Yep.
That still remember their roots. Yeah. And that can really set up a very interesting conflict between the gentleman gangster and the thug.
Yeah. Because, I mean, those almost model like religious organizations to a degree. because
their formations are very similar, and there are very close ties in the Yakuza to both Shinto and Buddhism, and in the Mafia to Catholicism.
yeah,
Mhm.
and they kind of follow a similar hierarchy.
Also to a certain brand of Italian folk magic that is still Christian.
Yep.
Which could be very interesting if you're looking at it from the World of Darkness perspective.
I like how you shoehorned that in there. That's great.
So, but even then, Brian's definitely right. There'll be the new kid coming into that organization who just sees it as a path to power. And the conflict between that new kid and the hierarchy, if the hierarchy wins, it maintains its traditions. If the new kid comes in, it's like Killmonger taking over Wakanda.
Yeah.
Suddenly, he's a nasty bastard with a big gun that nobody else can handle.
One of the
Black Panther.
our friend Jesse in chat here too made a good point. All it can take is somebody with a strict moral code and a certain level of charisma to start an uprising, good or bad.
Yep.
Yes.
All you need is...
It goes both ways. And if they're eloquent speakers, it's worse.
Because then all you need is
charisma gets people to follow you. Eloquence gets people to understand what you want them to do.
Mm-hmm.
The combination, when you combine it with a loud voice so everybody can hear you, that's how we got some of the most effective leaders this planet has seen. Again, for both good and ill.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I believe Mr. Ollivander of the Wand Shop once said, "We did many great things. Terrible, but great."
Mm-hmm. Such a great actor. It's a shame he's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I responded there and said, oftentimes rebellions use more brutal tactics than their oppressors. If you've ever read The Black Company, they talk about that, where they go up against rebels that have a great message, but are harder on the general populace than the nobles in charge. And it gets pretty nasty.
If you want to be disillusioned, look up, see if you can find out the actual history of the American Revolution. It's somewhat different than what you were taught.
Yeah, it's pretty dark.
I like to start with, they were protesting the taxes on tea going down, not up.
Yeah, basically.
Because they were smugglers.
Mm-hmm.
There's that underbelly side again coming into...
The more you know about real life history, and I'll say this over and over again, the more you know about real life history combined with the more you know about folklore.
Yeah.
And obviously all the fantasy you can read or take in anyway, get it into your eyeballs, get it into your brain. But the more history and folklore and mythology you know, the deeper and richer your world is going to be, because this is what people have really done and what people have always thought, and where they coincide, whole worlds reside.
Yep.
Okay. Who's got another point or a world building tip that they've been thinking about that we haven't touched on?
Okay, we talked last time. We talked about the resource. We talked about, like, your town has to have its water. Your town has to have its either trade or its sources of food, etc. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What we didn't talk about is the fact that at least by the time of, say, the Bronze Age, the idea that is so common in fantasy games of this wild frontier is kind of a lie. Any place you go in a setting, a world where the majority of it has reached medieval technology or later, right? Every place has people. It's just that they may not look or act like you. The reason this is important, I'm not going to get onto my soapbox again, but the reason this is important for world building is to understand that as you're expanding the frontier, the borders of your civilized kingdom, what are you expanding it into? The old-fashioned answer, to go back to keep on the borderlands and the rest of it, is into the lands of chaos, where there is no law and the monsters live. Where they live, where the orcs live, where the goblins live. And here we are, coming in, building stuff, cutting down their forests, building this and that and the other thing. If you can, it's perfectly fine, by the way, to do that, to run those games. I'm not passing judgment. What I'm saying is take a minute and flip the script in your head while you're building your world and understand that there are evil individuals. Maybe there are even evil races because they've been demonically possessed or they're earthbound demons like orcs were in Tolkien. Totally different thing than what we're talking about in D&D orcs. But mostly, as a whole, sapient beings are sapient beings. People are people. They have needs, they have urges, they satisfy those. And when you keep in mind that, as we discussed earlier tonight, the default state of humanity is war. Because we're always expanding into each other's territory.
Yep.
All the time. Because we always need resources. And even when we don't need resources, we think we might later, or we're worried about you taking ours. As a very cogent example right now, most people don't realize, Russia invading the Ukraine was inevitable.
Yep.
Russia can't feed itself.
Yeah.
Nope, it cannot.
They've never been able to feed themselves.
Nope.
They've held the Ukraine for hundreds of years, specifically because it could feed them. Yeah, and people are like, oh, they can get their food through trade. They can, but no nation can stomach being that dependent on the goodwill of others while nations still exist.
Well, no, it goes against power politics.
It makes you vulnerable. It means anyone can make you do anything.
Exactly.
By just withholding your food.
Yep. You become a
I'm not
principality.
excusing Russia's actions. They are horrible. No. I'm just making sure people understand that, like every other war we've had in human history, there are very real causes for it that have nothing to do with the ideologies we espouse.
Yep. No, that's why having central tensions in your world are really important. Like civilization versus nature, or more correctly, you could even rebrand it, colonialism versus, tribalism and so forth. Because really, a lot of those are the central tension of many campaign settings. If you just take a couple of steps back and look at the overarching central tension.
Yeah, if you literally go into the Keep on the Borderlands, that entire game is about expanding the borders of a quote unquote civilized just meaning lives in cities, kingdom, into the wilds.
Yeah.
And the actually very understandable negative response of the people who already lived there.
Yeah, because they're going to get bulldozed.
As a person of half native extraction, Cherokee, Choctaw, and Seminole on one side, my perspective on this is not identical to many of my peers, but I also feel, however, that there's nothing wrong with telling those stories. Stories are always going to be told from a certain perspective.
Yep. It's not wrong.
Bad guys will be decided by either which side you're on, the other side is the bad guys, or which side wins, then the side that lost was the bad guys.
Yep. And typically the normal folk don't care, because they don't really care who's ruling them and whether or not those people feel bad about the peasants that are still in squalor.
Except when you can convince the normal folk that the other normal folk are monsters.
Exactly. By dehumanizing.
Correct. Which is a lot easier when they're green and have tusks.
Exactly. So it's
But-
definitely poignant to consider those elements when you're developing your world.
It is, because you can still use creatures like orcs,
Yeah.
as irredeemably evil creatures.
But there
Just
better be a
don't
good
portray
reason.
them as indigenous people who are being pushed aside by the civilized lands if you're going to do that.
Nope.
Use them as
Yeah.
monsters who've come out of the pits of hell to eat you. I mean,
Yeah.
the orcs in the first Warcraft, I'm not talking about how they are now. The orcs in the first
That's
Warcraft
exactly
were
where I
literally
went, yeah.
monsters from another world who were invading your world to destroy it.
Yep.
There is nothing immoral about fighting them, killing them to the last person.
Yep. You're just
They won't
protecting
even
your.
be here if they're not invading you.
Yep. You're just protecting your existence.
Right. So if you want that kind of a clear-cut moral story, make sure your monsters, make sure your villains are monsters.
Yep. Exactly.
Make sure there is a distinction between monsters and people. Monsters can be people-shaped. Just look at Congress. Sorry.
That was amazing. I mean,
But there has to be a distinction. And
Yeah.
if you make the mistake that D&D did probably in second edition and start giving the monsters cultures that can be described in human ways,
yeah, that's a mistake.
you have stepped over a line.
Yep.
Without knowing it, because you're actually trying to make your world deeper and more interesting.
Yeah, but you need to make
But
them.
now you started unconsciously assigning monsters to human cultures because that's all you have.
Yep.
You don't have in your head alien cultures that you can just summon on a whim. There are a few people who have very carefully, painstakingly created new alien cultures.
Mhm.
Even in those, if you pay attention, you can see their influences. You
Oh,
know
yeah.
which cultures they used.
Mhm.
It is far better to know what cultures you're using, admit you're using them, and be transparent about it, and be respectful. But that means not taking those cultures and making them into a pastiche of monsters.
Exactly. No, monsters need to be irredeemably villains,
Right.
which means
Yeah.
they cannot have elements of humanity that can be, what would you consider, relatable, not in the same sense at least. Like, you can have tragic villains, you can have tragic monsters, but they can't be relative to cultural equivalencies.
One of my examples for that is I have actually, in the World of Darkness, taken probably what you would see in a normal fantasy game as the most irredeemable things. Literal dark demons.
Mm-hmm.
And portrayed them in a sympathetic light. Shown that they had bad situations, bad choices.
Mm-hmm.
One of the lines I used was, we had choice, freedom of choice one time. One time we got to choose something. One time we had no idea how it would turn out, and we were damned by it forever.
Yep. Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Demon the Fallen is a great game, by the way.
Yes, it is.
I was playing a Luciferian in that. That was super fun.
I don't know if it's Luciferians. There's the ones that want to. I was a reconciler, I think.
Yep.
I was a fallen seraph, so I was of the same host as Lucifer. I was like one of the bannermen of that host. It was kind of funny.
Yeah.
I love that game now.
Yeah, it's excellent. It's really well done. A lot of RP.
One of the people in the chat put in there, it's like, borrowing real cultures is its own episode, and that very well would be, but it also could be a very short thing, as don't do it, or if you do, don't misrepresent. We've touched on all those things, like, don't make it, like, don't use those to be monsters, don't make them be the bad guy, don't make them be the enemy, don't make them be somebody you have to eradicate.
Do not villainize a culture. Okay? That's a hard line. Just don't.
You know what's cool, though, is if you find an ancient culture that's no longer extant and everybody hated them even back then, you can get a little more free.
Yeah, that's fair.
Don't do Persia,
that's
though,
true.
because they didn't deserve it. The Greeks were the bad guys about half the time.
You're not wrong.
So
The Greeks are usually the bad guys. Let's be real.
Well, the Greeks weren't a group of people. They were people who hated each other more than they hated anyone else.
Exactly.
The whole Peloponnesian Wars about that.
So I think the last point I'm going to kind of touch on for maybe get a couple of closing remarks and everything too is, Don mentioned that you can still have a tragic villain and a tragic monster. You can still have a bad guy or someone that does evil things be redeemable in your game.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be its own story or another part to go through.
You're not wrong. Those redemption arcs are good. I mean, I'm more of a fan of the Berserk style of tragic villain, personally, where you can relate to them, but they're still tragic and were monstrous and terrible and are probably going to end up dead in a bad way.
Yeah, here's the interesting thing about the redemption arc. Sure, maybe there's something tragic about them. Maybe they can be redeemed, but is it fair to do so?
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
They've still killed how many thousand people?
Yeah, that's kind of like...
Should they be allowed off the hook because they said, I'm sorry, I won't do it again?
That's one of my problems with Return of the Jedi. Just saying.
So
I recognize that Vader in that situation made the only reasonable choice. A choice which allowed him to redeem himself and die.
Yeah.
Because that is the only redemption that is possible in such situations.
Yeah. I still
when you have gone so far beyond the pale that even you can't find your way back, even if you want to, and you know that you don't deserve to.
Yeah.
Then the only possible redemption is to die for the greater good.
Yeah, fair. I still don't think he should have been a Force ghost, though.
He certainly shouldn't have been a Force ghost replaced by Hayden Christensen.
Yeah, that's fair.
All right, but play those arcs carefully, and it's a valid question. Should they? And you got to go at the table, and see how it goes. But a lot of this will tie kind of back into a session 0, especially with people you don't know, and that is real often in this day and age with the online play and everything, is what might seem perfectly fine and all right to you might not be to one or multiple of your players. Or, if you're a player, same thing applies.
Let me be perfectly clear. In Rhaegar right now, one of my player characters is a redemption paladin. She has thus far redeemed a bloodlust, blinded, rabid, Wolverine person, an undead king, and a chromatic dragon. So I'm not saying as DM or ST I won't allow it. I'm saying there are philosophical arguments against it.
Yep. Like I said, I like the tragic villains in the Berserk arcs because they really do a good job balancing how to build a villain that you can be like, oh man, that sucks. You really got put in a bad place. But they are so far beyond saving that they just need to die.
To make a really good villain in that way, you've got to choose to give them a good original motivation, a good a key start, something that really would push somebody.
Yep.
But then they have to take it too far. If they don't take it too far, they're not a villain.
Yep. Then they're just broken.
That's one of the best villains you can make is one that's relatable, that you understand their reasonings and what they're doing. I always go back to Thanos. There was good reasoning for what he wanted to do, and he wasn't wrong in situations.
But he wasn't wrong about the problem.
The problem, yes. Yes.
I mean, but come on, you can snap. Why would you snap half the resources away too?
Well,
He
Yeah.
I
killed
mean,
all life, not just the sentience.
yeah. Well, I mean, it was all just to impress Death, if you go by the comics.
Oh, in the
So,
comics, yes. He
Yes.
just, like, I'm going to kill half the universe to
he
impress.
was flirting with Death, who dumped him and went out with Deadpool, and that's the best.
Okay, the Deadpool half of that only ever happened in Deadpool comics, and
Fair.
we need to be aware that that is all from Wade's point of view and is
True.
completely unreliable. He
That's-
even says so.
True.
He'll
But
be
it's
the
still
first one.
more fun.
He'll be the first one to tell you.
Yep.
However, I would have dug the introduction of Hela as Thanos' love interest and something like that going on.
That would be fantastic.
Because in some of the later comics, they have introduced Hela as a love interest for Thanos as a proxy for the greater entity Death.
I like that.
Yeah.
Just,
But don't get me started on Ragnarok
Yep.
and all of the things they
We're-
decided to.
we're letting all the other nerd flags fly now with different things now.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
As you do. It's all
I
world
have a
building.
very
in
big
this
wall,
extent.
and it is full of flags de nerd.
I admit nothing. I admit nothing.
Everything.
I don't know. I think I could see the tiny little holes in your wall where you pulled the flags down.
I'm still moving stuff around.
That's why Brian has the
See?
fuzziness behind him, so we can't see it.
Oh
all.
yeah, it's a mess back there.
Like, I still have some of my stuff. Like, I got my wall of comp books at the top at least now.
I was
So
gonna say the bookshelf looks nice.
yeah, I still have all my miniatures and boxes and stuff, and moving stuff around. It's a never-ending thing.
Oh yeah.
Maybe that'll be something we talk about another time. George is making comments about Zuko and
So
Iroh and stuff
so,
too.
Oh, yeah, I
should we
love
talk
Zuko.
about should we talk about some capitalism and corporate greed and certain
Nope.
toy companies and
Nope. If you want to, if you want to, I will let you. I'm gonna sign off. Not that it's not a valid talk and there's not a lot of bad stuff going on.
I'm only
Yeah,
gonna
not
make
what we-
I was only gonna make one sentence about it, and that's if the rogue is caught trying to pass something along to a noble, and they go, "Oh, my bad," and they write something prettier with a bunch of loopholes in it, do you trust the rogue? That's all I have to say about that whole situation.
You've said it well, and we can move on. Because I don't
There we go.
disagree with you. That's why I took all my stuff off DM's Guild and Drive-Thru.
Yep. When we first started forming DGG, I didn't like the DM's Guild profit model, so I pulled everything that we had off of there.
I wasn't trying to profit. I was just trying to get visibility.
Yeah, no,
But
I
at this
gotcha.
point- yeah, at this point, I'm like,
Nah.
I disapprove of you as a whole. But yeah,
Yep.
no, this topic
Is a
of world
whole
building that we have
episode.
dealt with today has been a lot of fun.
Heck yeah.
I have, we're gonna have to have a part 3 because there's never going to actually end questions.
Yeah.
That's fair. I did ask for more, and I will probably get some more like this last time when they came in. But
And one of these times we're just going to have to get all 4 of us into an actual play one shot while we're doing this.
yeah, I'm not gonna.
Well,
say
then we will
that.
need
That would
one
be a lot
more
of fun.
person.
Yep.
Because you need the at least the possibility of party balance, right? You don't have to have the party balance. You just have to pretend that you could.
I could probably talk Jesse into doing it.
Oh, I'm sure we could find any number of people. to
Well,
join this group
Unfortunately,
and
I'm the
fantastic.
oldest, which means I'll probably be stuck running.
Maybe.
Depends on what we want to do. Maybe somebody will jump out of the woodwork and have an idea, and it'll be like, "That's a good idea. I've got 4 great players for you lined up already."
It could happen.
Yep. For sure.
So yeah, thanks for joining us, everybody. Before we sign off, as always, gonna give our guests a chance to plug themselves and socials and their creations. So I'll start with, man, it's like this screen here is different from like the Twitch screen in order. So on my screen, Jack's next to me in the format. So Jack, we'll start with you.
All right. I'm Jack Kellum, also known as Jack Giant Killer at Jack Gogsbane on Twitter. Look for Of Gods and Game Masters. I have my own website. I have recently taken everything off of DM's Guild and Drive-Thru in order for it to undergo revision and change into different systems.
Absolutely.
I've recently created an alternative to one of the warlocks of the shore intellectual property pieces, the one that eats brains. I also have a brain-eating monster of my own called the Encephalid. You can find it on my website. I'm developing.
Absolutely.
I'm developing my own eye orb alternative that will be on my website tomorrow.
Heck yeah.
In a non-system specific way. The reason I'm saying this, by the way, is both of these will be completely available for other people to use.
Yep.
So,
Totally open
Anyway.
automatic replacements. We're counterspelling the evil wizard.
Oh,
Indeed. So anyway, I do have an actual play that runs on Tales from the Table Studios here on Twitch next Thursday at 8 p.m. Other than that, you can find everything either in my drum link on my Twitter or from my webpage, which also has links to every freaking where. So
Heck yeah.
all right, and Brian.
So I am Brian. Online, you can find me everywhere as Bjark the Bard. Twitter, Instagram. I have a Facebook business page. I never go on it though, so don't go on there. I also have my own website. You can go on there, read my tips on GMing. Coming up, I am working with a group of people to make the only heist book that is coming out right now for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. There is no other heist book coming out right now.
I mean,
it's not coming out right now. It's
haven't heard
they aren't even
anything.
advertising it. They just put it.
I haven't heard anything
Fun
about
fact,
any other
they
heist book.
just put the picture up yesterday. And you want to know what we did yesterday? We dropped a whole bunch of information and our cover. So just keep your eyes out for it. It's called Beyond the Golden Vault.
Nice.
Well,
Beyond the Golden Vault.
One, it's bound to be better. Two, it's third party, and people should be supporting third party producers in these rough times.
Yep.
Yeah.
Three, I know it's better because you're involved. So everybody should rush and get this book.
And I'm going to say
it's
going
to be a
yeah,
go ahead.
Brian's not wrong because it is the only heist book I've heard anything about.
Yeah.
It's the only one I've heard anything about, so it's got to be the only one out there.
Yeah, we're going to be slow dripping for like the next month or so, little bits and bobbles, and it's going to be good. It's basically what Nocturnes and Nightmares was for horror. This is going to be for heists and crimes and capers, where we're just going to give you a little bit of everything.
Nocturnes and Nightmares was so good. I have a review of it up on my page. It was amazing.
Yep.
You should take my money. You have people guess who did what part again. I got to try and redeem myself.
Oh, that was so funny.
0 for 7. I got to try and at least get one this time.
Oh yeah, no, that project was amazing and fantastic, and it's actually my first published project. So,
okay.
And we got an article coming out in February, right, Joe?
Yep. That was going to be my next thing here because I was going to say maybe we'll talk about articles and producing with random encounters at the end of February, but we might have something else to talk about at the end of February depending on how everything rolls out. So yeah, there will be an article coming out too. Brian is hosting it on his blog, but it is a collaboration of GMs. We did one already that released back in December about pets and summons. And notice I said GMs. These are, system agnostic articles that we're doing. There will be mention of different systems and things that apply to certain systems, yes, but the goal is to just grab things across systems. This one that's going to be coming out here about 2-ish weeks, somewhere around mid-February. It looks like that's about the system, so people get enough time to write and come up with ideas and everything, because this isn't most of these people's first job or priority, so life gets in the
Yep.
way. So we're not putting hard deadlines to try and make people do it. But this one that's coming out, imagine this, is talking about world building.
Yep. They really tied our hands, though. They're like, "What's your number one tip?" I'm like, "This is hard."
Yeah, I did. So Brian is hosting. I'm kind of the narrator or guider along for most of these, and so they each had wonderful opinions of each of the four people writing. So I was like, all right, go with that. But also, since we're talking world building here and we are GMs, I want you to give your number one tip for someone to help world building.
Yep.
So that will be coming out. Keep your eyes on that. We'll be blasting on the socials. It, along with, I'm pretty sure, Nocturne's Nightmares and Beyond the Golden Vault, was probably born from the Cove Discord server.
Yes, the Cove.
Um,
The Cove, the Cove, the Cove.
So all the participants, Dawn did write for the first article and is also writing for this article, but all the other players are brand new.
Yep.
And I haven't had a chance to read all through the articles myself yet, but I've had a lot of back and forth, and I'm really excited about it. So,
I kept mine short this time.
Good job, Don. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled for that. And also, if you have any ideas out there, if you're listening, for something you would like to hear a lot of different GMs' opinions about, drop a comment on the blog. Drop us a line for Damn Good Games, or into the Cove, or just on Twitter, anything else. And because actually the world building topic, it just happened to coincide because I'd seen a lot of Jack stuff, and I wanted to try and get Jack on here and talk to Jack. But I also posted a poll on Twitter, and world building won.
Yep.
So the next article may end up being on NPCs if I go by that, because NPCs was second place on that poll. But if something new comes that we like a lot more, hey, we'll see where it goes from there. So, yeah, I think that's all we got for tonight. Like I already said, thanks for joining us.
Heck
Any
yeah.
parting goodbyes, words of wisdom, or gestures towards a certain something out there?
This isn't going to make sense unless you've watched the whole episode, but build deep, build wide, build shallow.
Just like Grandma.
You couldn't resist, could you?
Nope.
You're a bad man. I'm impressed.
I saw him getting ready to say something.
I couldn't
and
help it.
I should have known with what was going there. But all right.
No, that's great advice. Seriously.
That is,
Yeah.
Listen, don't let Don, what Don said, derail from Jack's quick something like congregation there of what we talked about in the beginning. Everything that'll work. And yeah. Good night, everybody. Till next time.
Yep.
Night.
Stay legendary, folks.
Thanks for having me on.